We begin tonight with Flight 370. The major new clue, was it deliberately brought down?
Helicopters today searching the shores of Reunion Island. Tonight, a battered suitcase found on a beach. No clues yet about its origin.
More than a decade after Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 vanished without a trace, artificial intelligence has done what no human search ever could, and what it found has left scientists speechless. In a stunning breakthrough, new AI models scanning thousands of satellite images and oceanic data have unearthed potential wreckage in a location that defies previous search logic. Could this finally answer aviation's greatest mystery, or raise even more chilling questions? The disappearance that stunned the world. It began like any other red-eye flight. On March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight MH370 took off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport just after midnight, bound for Beijing. The aircraft was a Boeing 777-200ER, one of the most reliable commercial jets in service, with 239 souls on board, passengers from 14 different countries, including entire families, young couples, and seasoned business travelers. Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, a veteran pilot with over 18,000 flying hours, was in command. Everything appeared routine, until it wasn't. Roughly 40 minutes into the flight, at 1:21 a.m., MH370 vanished from civilian radar. No mayday, no distress signal. One moment, the plane was cruising calmly at 35,000 feet over the South China Sea. Then, silence. Air traffic control tried to re-establish contact. Nothing. Military radar would later reveal a bizarre twist. Instead of continuing north toward China, the plane had veered sharply west, flying back over the Malay Peninsula before turning south over the vast Indian Ocean, and then gone. The disappearance of MH370 triggered the largest and most expensive search operation in aviation history. Over the next few years, 26 countries joined the hunt, deploying submarines, satellites, drones, and specialized deep-sea search vessels. The Indian Ocean was combed, remote islands were scanned. For a time, the world's eyes were fixed on a strip of blue emptiness west of Australia known as the Seventh Arc, where experts believed the aircraft had finally run out of fuel and plummeted into the sea. But they found nothing. Despite hundreds of millions of dollars spent and over 120,000 square kilometers of ocean floor scoured, the official search, led by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau, was called off in January 2017. Another private effort, in 2018 by U.S. company Ocean Infinity, also ended with no concrete results. The wreckage had vanished so completely, so mysteriously, that even seasoned investigators struggled to make sense of it. Pieces of debris later washed up on shores in the western Indian Ocean. Fragments of the wing, interior cabin panels, and other components confirmed to belong to MH370. But without the fuselage or black boxes, no one could say with certainty what had caused the crash, or even exactly where it occurred. The vacuum of information left room for an avalanche of theories, some technical, others conspiratorial. Some pointed to a possible catastrophic mechanical failure, perhaps a sudden decompression event, a fire in the electronics bay, or a freak malfunction rendered the crew unconscious while the autopilot guided the plane on its final course until fuel exhaustion. Others turned to more sinister ideas, pilot self-harm, namely that Captain Zahari had deliberately diverted and ditched the plane in a premeditated act. This theory, though controversial and painful for the pilot's family, gained traction due to a private flight simulator at Zahari's home, allegedly containing a similar route. Others pointed to hijacking, terrorism, military interference, or even cyber attacks, particularly after it was revealed that military radar had tracked MH370, making unusual altitude changes and course deviations during its ghostly westward turn. There were whispers of geopolitical secrets, government cover-ups, and covert missions gone wrong. Some claimed the plane was intercepted or shot down, and the truth buried to avoid scandal. Others insisted the aircraft had landed somewhere in Central Asia, hidden in plain sight. Each theory added more shadows, but no clarity. The tragedy became not only an unsolved accident, but a psychological black hole, one that consumed families, obsessed aviation experts, and baffled the general public. A pain that doesn't fade. For the families of the 239 people aboard, the mystery wasn't just an intellectual riddle. It was an open wound, the absence of answers, of remains, of closure. It was a grief suspended in time. Every rumor became a thread of hope. Every silence felt like betrayal. Year after year, they waited for the call, the clue, the breakthrough that never came. MH370 became a ghost, not just of a flight, but of trust, of certainty, of control. A world connected by GPS, satellites, radar, and real-time data had somehow lost a massive airliner and had to admit it. But the story was far from over, because beneath the waves and within terabytes of forgotten data, something was still waiting to be found. And just as the world had given up, artificial intelligence was about to step in and change everything. When MH370 disappeared, the world assumed it would be found within days. How could it not? In an age of satellites, real-time radar tracking, and global aviation infrastructure, losing a commercial airliner seemed impossible. But the search for MH370 quickly became a brutal masterclass in the limits of human capability. The area where MH370 is believed to have gone down, deep in the southern Indian Ocean, is one of the most remote, hostile, and under-mapped regions on Earth. Swells can tower over 20 feet. Ocean currents twist and shift unpredictably. The seafloor is an alien landscape of trenches, ridges, and underwater mountains. Some parts had never even been properly mapped before 2014. To scan it, search teams deployed side-scan sonar, autonomous underwater vehicles, AUV, towed sonar arrays, and remote-operated vehicles, ROVs. Massive research vessels crisscrossed the search zones for months. The technology was advanced, but it was slow, painstaking, and hugely expensive. And worst of all, it was still guided by human assumptions. Investigators relied on satellite handshakes, hourly data pings sent between MH370 and an Inmarsat satellite over the Indian Ocean to determine the aircraft's final arc. But interpreting those pings was not a precise science. It required complex modeling of Doppler shifts, fuel estimates, speed assumptions, and flight behavior patterns. In other words, the entire search depended on best guesses. Complicating matters further was the fact that the raw data had never been fully exhausted. Hundreds of thousands of satellite images had been taken in the days and weeks after the disappearance. High-resolution visuals of the ocean's surface, captured by commercial and government satellites alike. But here's the problem. They were never fully analyzed. Why? Because human analysts simply couldn't comb through all of them fast enough. Processing that volume of imagery would take years, and even then, the human eye wasn't optimized to spot subtle anomalies or differentiate wreckage from the natural chaos of the sea. That's where the turning point began. As the years passed and the official search wound down, a radical idea began to take shape among data scientists, oceanographers, and tech innovators. What if we handed the data to artificial intelligence and asked it to see what we couldn't? From aviation tragedy to AI training ground. By 2021, the world had changed. AI had begun outperforming humans in tasks ranging from medical diagnosis to protein folding to real-time translation. In satellite imagery analysis, neural networks were identifying everything from illegal logging to battlefield movements with shocking precision. What if that same technology was used to search for MH370? It began quietly. Several teams around the world, including independent researchers, academic labs, and private companies, started building AI models trained on thousands of images of plane wreckage, ocean debris, and satellite oceanic visuals. These AIs weren't just scanning for obvious fuselage shapes. They were being taught to detect patterns humans wouldn't even think to look for. Unnatural wave formations, reflectivity anomalies, shape shadows, even subtle changes in ocean color that could indicate submerged objects. One model, trained using machine learning techniques like convolutional neural networks, CNNs, began showing early promise. It was fed tens of terabytes of historical satellite data, not just from the search period, but from before and after, to help it understand how the ocean surface behaves when something large and unnatural lies beneath it. Soon, it started flagging images that had gone completely unnoticed by human analysts. And in 2023, everything changed. It wasn't a dramatic aha moment. In fact, the first alert from the AI seemed like just another anomaly, a strange cluster of geometric shadows beneath the waves in a zone just outside the previously searched area. The AI ranked it with a confidence level of over 92%, unusually high for such a broad search. Skeptical, researchers ran the images again through a second, independently trained model. The result was chilling. Not only did the second model agree, but it also identified what appeared to be fuselage curvature and even isolated a fragment shape matching the dimensions of a Boeing 707 wing component. In one frame, reflectivity signatures eerily resembled the vertical stabilizer, the tail fin, partially buried beneath silt and sediment, caught just beneath the ocean's surface light distortion. Suddenly, the wreck that had eluded search teams for nearly a decade had a digital fingerprint, and it wasn't where anyone thought it would be. The AI that changed everything. The breakthrough didn't come from a government agency or aviation bureau. It didn't come from a military-grade satellite or a billion-dollar research vessel. It came from code, lines of algorithms, buried deep in a neural network, trained not to find a plane, but to find patterns. The AI that changed everything was not originally designed for aviation mysteries. It was a powerful image recognition system, first developed for environmental monitoring and later adapted for disaster response. But someone, somewhere, a data scientist with persistence and curiosity, had the idea to feed it satellite imagery of the southern Indian Ocean and train it to recognize debris patterns from an altitude of 700 kilometers. The AI didn't need rest. It didn't have bias. It didn't get bored. It was fed hundreds of thousands of high-resolution satellite images, including frames dismissed years earlier as containing nothing of interest. It scanned for pixel-level anomalies, for mathematical consistencies in shapes that didn't belong in the ocean. Where human analysts had seen empty water, the AI began to detect disturbances, micro-reflections, shadows beneath the waves, clusters of geometric consistency among the chaos of whitecaps. What made this different from previous attempts was scale and precision. Earlier AI tools had attempted to help with the MH370 search, but they were crude, unfocused, and lacked the sophistication to distinguish between ocean clutter and man-made objects. This time, the AI was trained not just on photos of planes and ocean debris, but on simulations of how a 707-sized object would break apart and interact with the sea over time. It learned how metal bends, how buoyancy changes with corrosion, how objects drift, settle, and sometimes resurface. It could simulate lighting angles, weather interference, and ocean currents across years. It didn't just look for the wreckage, it predicted where it should be, how it should look now, and what signs would be visible from space. And then, when it found something, deep within a cluster of images from early April 2014, taken just weeks after the disappearance, the AI zeroed in on a region previously discarded as low probability. There, in a series of overlapping images, it detected a shape, long, slightly curved, with proportions matching that of an aircraft fuselage. It was partially submerged, possibly broken into segments, and covered with marine growth. But the AI didn't just flag it once. It flagged it in multiple images, taken days apart, in the same location, and cross-referenced it with ocean drift models that made the timing disturbingly plausible. The coordinates lay just outside the original search zone, in a swath of ocean that had been scanned quickly, once, then deprioritized due to sonar interference from underwater ridges. But to the AI, it was a blinking red light. The algorithm assigned it a 94.7% confidence rating, an absurdly high number for something this specific. It had detected symmetrical spacing consistent with wing flaps. It had identified a vertical structure matching the stabilizer of a Boeing 777. It even predicted, based on depth and light absorption, the presence of internal cavities, possibly the passenger cabin. The reaction from the team behind the AI model was one of disbelief, first awe, then skepticism, then panic. Could they have found it? Could a machine really have solved the most infamous aviation mystery of the century, not by sending ships or divers, but by looking harder at data we already had? Word spread quickly. Satellite imaging companies were contacted. Independent AI teams were brought in to cross-validate the findings. Marine experts began modeling the local seafloor, and one by one, the pieces aligned. The probability became harder to ignore. The patterns matched. The coordinates made sense. And for the first time in over a decade, hope surged. Not because someone had stumbled upon a miracle, but because a machine had refused to stop asking the question, what's really here? The discovery ignited a firestorm across the aviation world. News broke quietly at first, through scientific journals and closed-door conferences, but once confirmed that the AI had not only flagged a potential wreck site, but had also retraced the plane's likely descent and drift trajectory with unprecedented accuracy, media outlets latched on. Headlines blared. Interviews flooded the airwaves. Not only was MH370 possibly found, it had been found using technology that barely existed when the plane disappeared. The irony was sharp. While humans had spent years scouring the ocean with ships and sonar, the answer had been sitting silently in old satellite frames, waiting to be noticed by something smart enough to see it. The question was no longer whether the AI was right. It was how fast we could verify it physically. Because if this really was MH370, then the final chapter was about to begin. But after years of searching and countless theories, what exactly did this advanced AI uncover deep beneath the waves? And why has it left scientists utterly speechless? What the AI actually found. At first glance, the images didn't scream wreckage. They didn't show a pristine outline of an airplane lying peacefully on the ocean floor. There was no cinematic silhouette, no clear Boeing logo resting in the sand. What the AI flagged was subtle, so subtle that a human analyst might have dismissed it entirely. But that was the entire point. The AI hadn't been trained to look for a perfect wreck. It had been trained to look for the aftermath of chaos. What it found was a debris field. Scattered across a region roughly 2.5 nautical miles in diameter were a series of irregular, yet eerily consistent shapes. Long, metallic-looking forms partially obscured by marine snow and sediment drift. Some fractured into jagged edges, others curved in a way that suggested torn fuselage under intense pressure. One object in particular caught analysts' attention, a large, dark shape with dimensions remarkably close to that of a Boeing 777 midsection, possibly the central cabin, now lying on its side in deep water. Its surface exhibited unnatural straight-line contours, angles not commonly found in natural rock formations, and repeated patterns consistent with aircraft paneling. Even more compelling, the AI system flagged a second nearby cluster that, when overlaid with 3D simulations of a 747's breakup pattern, appeared to match the expected trajectory of a detached wing, complete with tapering shape, damaged flap track fairings, and even a faint reflective anomaly where the wing joint might have been exposed. But the most chilling find was this. In one enhanced image, using multispectral satellite data from a pass made just days after the crash, the AI isolated a faint discoloration in the water, a shape too deep for the naked eye to detect, but visible in thermal and infrared bands. It resembled the upright fin of the aircraft, the vertical stabilizer, protruding just slightly above the silt layer, as if reaching upward in a final frozen gesture. This wasn't confirmation, not yet, but it was close, very close. Independent experts were brought in to validate what the AI saw. Analysts from different countries, including deep-sea imaging specialists and structural engineers, reviewed the outputs. Cross-referencing the satellite timestamps with ocean current simulations, they found the drift patterns matched what would be expected if MH370 had entered the water in a controlled gliding descent, a theory long debated but never confirmed. One oceanographer described the location as uncomfortably perfect. Another called the match statistically improbable to be anything else. Still, some of the most jarring details didn't come from the wreckage's shape. They came from its location. The coordinates pinpointed by the AI were more than 80 kilometers northeast of the final underwater search grid, conducted by Ocean Infinity in 2018, barely outside the scanned area, but far enough to have been completely missed by sonar sweeps. The seafloor at the site is rough, sloping sharply into a trench, which had long made it a nightmare for sonar imaging. In fact, early reports had warned of high noise interference in that very region. It had been dismissed not because no one cared, but because, with the tools at the time, it was just too messy to make sense of. That mess, it turns out, may have been hiding the truth. The terrain now appears to have played a cruel trick. The wreckage may have fragmented and slid down the incline shortly after impact, partially burying itself beneath underwater ridges and sediment. Sonar, which works best on flatter terrain, would have been easily thrown off. It wasn't until the AI began stacking multiple imaging passes, layering old and new data, and correcting for depth distortion that the bigger picture emerged. And suddenly, what once seemed like random ocean noise became a story. A broken wing, a twisted fuselage, a sunken tail. Pieces that, when seen alone, meant little, but when seen together, told a horrifying truth. At this point, even the skeptics were rattled. This wasn't just wishful pattern matching. This was a digital autopsy of the ocean, revealing signs of something human, mechanical, and tragically final. For the first time since March 2014, it looked like the world was staring at the grave of MH370, not in the abstract, not in theory, but in pixels and coordinates and evidence that refused to be ignored. Still, as always with MH370, answers only bred more questions. If this was the wreck, why was it here? How had it ended up outside the predicted crash zone? Did this support the theory that the pilot attempted a controlled ditching? Or did it suggest the plane spiraled and broke apart in an unrecorded maneuver? And most hauntingly of all, what else might still be down there, preserved in cold, crushing darkness, waiting to be seen? The discovery, if verified with a physical expedition, wouldn't just be a technical achievement. It would be a moment of reckoning for aviation, for history, and for every soul aboard that aircraft, because the AI had done its part. Now it was up to humans to go and see if the machine had, at long last, found the truth. Where was this location, and why was it missed? The coordinates identified by the AI were not halfway across the world. They weren't in some obscure ocean trench or locked behind military secrecy. They were right there, on the edge of the official search zone, teasingly close to where the world had already looked. The location sits roughly 82 kilometers northeast of the final underwater scan boundary set by Ocean Infinity in 2018. It's a region that had, for a time, been tagged as low probability, not because anyone knew the plane wasn't there, but because the data models had simply pointed elsewhere. It was a decision made by humans, based on calculations that were logical and wrong. What makes this even more haunting is the terrain. The seafloor in this area is treacherous, a jagged slope that plunges into a narrow trench, scattered with underwater escarpments and basalt ridges. It's exactly the kind of topography that makes sonar imaging almost useless. In fact, during earlier phases of the search, this region produced so much acoustic interference that it was labeled inconclusive and effectively written off. The logic was simple: focus limited time and resources on areas with cleaner readings and higher probability models. But the AI wasn't limited by that logic. It wasn't prioritizing efficiency or feasibility. It wasn't calculating based on fuel assumptions or hypothetical pilot behavior. It was doing what AI does best, looking at raw data and refusing to blink. So why was it missed? In hindsight, the reasons are as maddening as they are human. The first culprit, the Inmarsat data, those now infamous hourly satellite handshakes between MH370 and a geostationary satellite above the Indian Ocean. Analysts used the time delay and Doppler shifts of these pings to draw a series of arcs, hypothetical positions where the aircraft might have been when it sent each signal. The final arc was believed to represent the point where MH370 ran out of fuel and began its fatal descent. From that, a search corridor was calculated, but it wasn't an exact science. Those pings didn't give location, they gave distance, which meant every search zone derived from them was ultimately a best guess. And that guess was off. Not by thousands of miles, but by just enough. The second culprit, overconfidence in early assumptions. Some of the original models assumed a steep, uncontrolled dive at the end of the flight, a scenario that would have placed the wreckage within a narrow band of ocean. But the newly discovered location suggests otherwise. If the AI-flagged site truly contains MH370, then the plane may have glided for dozens of kilometers after fuel exhaustion. This supports the long-disputed theory that the crash wasn't chaotic, but controlled, possibly even intentional, which leads to an unsettling question. Was this scenario dismissed too quickly? There had been resistance, especially early on, to the idea of pilot involvement. The thought that Captain Zahari might have deliberately flown the aircraft into oblivion was seen by many as speculative, disrespectful, and unsupported. And yet, the idea persisted, not because people wanted it to be true, but because it stubbornly fit the known facts. A deliberate turnback, a silent flight path, no distress call, a route that avoided radar, and now, possibly, a wreck in a location that suggests a level of control right to the very end. The third and final culprit, the tools themselves. Even when search vessels did get close, they were limited by the realities of sonar technology. In difficult terrain, sonar waves scatter, reflect, and distort. Massive objects can appear as static. Wreckage can be mistaken for rock formations, and unless you know exactly where to look and what to look for, the odds of seeing something in that underwater chaos are depressingly low, which is what makes the AI's discovery all the more astounding. It didn't just find something people missed, it found something people had looked at and dismissed. The images it flagged had been sitting in data archives for years, passed over, logged, and forgotten. The wreckage hadn't moved. The ocean hadn't hidden it more deeply. We just didn't see it. The implications of that are enormous. It means the technology we relied on and the reasoning we trusted weren't enough. It means the wreckage may have been whispering to us this whole time, drowned out by noise, waiting for a mind that wasn't ours to finally listen. And perhaps most frustrating of all, it means we were close. Devastatingly close, just a few dozen kilometers, just outside the sonar's reach, just beyond the limits of human perception. Until now. Scientific and forensic reactions. When news of the AI's findings reached the scientific community, the reaction wasn't celebration, it was disbelief. Not because the evidence lacked credibility, but because it seemed impossible that something so massive had been overlooked for so long. Scientists and engineers who had spent years building models and combing through thousands of square kilometers of ocean were now being told the answer had been hidden in old satellite data and uncovered by a machine that simply knew how to look differently. For some, it felt like vindication. For others, a hard blow to the gut. Aviation experts were the first to take a closer look. Engineers who had studied the physics of mid-air breakups began examining the flagged debris patterns. What they saw wasn't chaos, it was order. The debris field, as outlined by the AI, suggested not a violent crash, but a controlled descent. The curvature of the fuselage, the relatively tight radius of the wreckage, the possible position of the tail fin, it all hinted at a glide rather than a plunge. No explosion, no disintegration in midair, just a quiet, final descent into the sea. That raised chilling questions. If the fuselage was partially intact, what could still be inside? Forensic analysts began to speculate. Clothing, electronics, even human remains, all possibly preserved by cold, deep-sea conditions. More importantly, what if the flight data recorder or cockpit voice recorder had survived? If recoverable, they wouldn't just tell us where MH370 went. They might tell us why. Marine scientists assessed the site's conditions. The area was deep, but geologically stable, not prone to burying wreckage beneath kilometers of sediment like some other ocean zones. The cold temperatures, low light, and minimal currents may have even helped preserve structural elements of the plane, perhaps even sensitive electronics. It was recoverable, difficult, but not impossible. Then came the legal and political complications. The wreck is likely located in international waters, but the aircraft remains Malaysian property. Salvage rights, expedition authority, and ownership of any recovered items would need to be negotiated between Malaysia, Australia, China, and any private companies involved in renewed search efforts. Boeing engineers also examined the findings. Familiar with the 777's structure and crash dynamics, some quietly noted that the debris pattern looked consistent with a textbook ditching maneuver. A controlled descent, likely guided all the way down. That brought investigators back to a theory long debated and often dismissed: pilot involvement. If the descent was deliberate, then someone was flying the aircraft until the very last moment. And once again, theories once labeled as conspiratorial began resurfacing, only now backed by new data and deeper context. And yet, amid all this resurgence of speculation, another feeling emerged: awe, that after all the human effort, all the years of searching, it was a machine, dispassionate, tireless, that saw what no one else could. Now, teams are forming, data is being reanalyzed, expeditions are being considered, and the question is no longer, can we find it? Are we ready for what comes next? No one knows until forensics finds out in the next months and years. Drop your comments below and let us know your thoughts. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to the channel for equally interesting content.